Hello there, televiewers. Greetings and welcome to this edition of Discussion. In discussion today, we shall be receiving Mr. Martin Jumbam. Martin Jumbam is a translator. He is a writer. He is a journalist. He is a senior citizen now. Most people say retired but not tired. Martin Jumbam has walked through life. He actually attended those pioneers of the bilingual grammar school in Buea. There were two bilingual schools in the Republic, the Federal Republic of Cameroon, one in Yaoundé, the other one in Buea, that actually started in Manawobe and later transferred to Buea. Martin Jumbam was a student there. From there, he moved to CAST Bambili. From Bambili, he went to other countries in Canada, in Spain, in France, in the United States of America to do translation. Back home, he did work in some structures that in the course of time we might have to talk about it. But at the moment today, we are talking with Mr. Martin Jumbam as a writer. And maybe in the course of his writing, we might also be talking about his career or his profession as a translator. Sir, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Philip. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Martin Jumbam, when I was reading your book, somewhere inside Bishop Paul Vetzekov was asking whether you are a brother of Kenjo Jumbam.
That's correct, yes.
Are you a brother of Kenjo Jumbam?
Oh, yes, I am. Kenjo Jumbam was our eldest brother. He left us about nearly 8 years ago now. And he's a very well-known Cameroonian writer, author of
The White Man of God,
White Man of God, Lukong and the Leopard, and a series of others. So yes, he was our eldest brother. That's correct. Yeah.
And does your inspiration to write come from him, or you developed it?
Come from him?
The Jumbam's family maybe was a family of writers.
Probably a family of storytellers. Yes, I know that my dad was a very good storyteller. My dad traveled a great deal when he was young. Traveled in northern Nigeria. You know, he was a trader, so he would carry things from Kumbu, from South, to northern Nigeria and sell there. So he always came back with so great stories for us, and we always cherished them because we were always waiting for him to tell us stories. And sometimes he told the same story over and over again the same way, but we were always interested to listen to that. So from there, might be that's where the writing DNA or the gene came from. It could have come from our father. Yes.
Sometimes people might listen to stories like that, but cannot effectively put them down in writing.
That's correct. Yes, Philip, one has to, writing, I know people say that people are born writers. Yes, you can have the gene to write, but then you need the training, the coaching, the mentoring. You know, you don't just pick up your pen and write. You may have a story in your mind, but how do you put it down? And that comes with a lot of work. A lot of mentoring, as I say, coaching. You must have somebody who can lead you. And I have had a chance in my life to go through many workshops, writing workshops, and coaching in several areas. That if you're writing a story, you have a character in your mind. How do you place that character down in writing? And how do you get other sub-characters around it? How do you have them work with each other or against each other, depending on what you want to say? So that needs some... there are guidelines, writing guidelines,
I imagine too that maybe your profession as a translator, you had to read through the works, writings by other people. reading through volumes in order to translate them. Did that also inspire your skills in writing?
Definitely, of course, definitely. You're not inventing the wheel. You're using language. It's just like you using language in journalism. All we need to do is learn to use the language well. That's our tool. That's what feeds us. So the idea is to use it well, learn to use it properly. And how do you learn to use a language well? Well, you have to read. You mentioned reading, volumes of books. And I also studied literature. I did comparative literature in different languages, and that also helps because people have been writing for God knows how long, and so you don't really come up with anything new. But it is how do you use the tool that is common to everybody in such a way that when somebody picks up what you have written, they first of all understand what you have written. I'm one person who believes very much, in fact, I'm very emphatic on the fact that a good writer should be a writer who is easy to understand. I know people talk of, difficult writing, hermetic writing, and all that. I don't believe in that. I believe that if you are to communicate, if you're given a chance, a microphone like this one, people should be able to understand you. And when you put something down in writing, people should be able to read and understand. And also, since I coach journalists and translators and interpreters, my advice to them has always been, keep it short and simple. The KISS principle. Keep it short and simple. When you are writing, you're writing for people to understand you. Why don't you just tell the people the story? So the language is not a barrier to your communication. The language should be a tool that carries the story forward. So that somebody reading gets the story, and and the language is no longer an obstacle. The language will be the tool that brings forward the story. And so the language should be simple. Not simplistic. Not simplistic. When you talk of simplistic, you have in mind something a little childish. Like
you simplify it to
a level of a child. But then, I don't know if you've ever tried this, Philip. Writing for children is not the easiest type of writing, contrary to what many people may think. I tried it once, and it was not easy to bring your story down to the level of a child, where the child will read and laugh and understand. It's not given to everybody. So all types of writings have their own audiences in mind. You're writing children's literature, which is very valid and very something to do. You must bring yourself down to the level of a child, I think. Now I write for adults. So my audience, as I'm writing, I have in mind my audience. Do people understand me? Will people understand me? And will I get my message across to them clearly? So that is where I say writing, keep it short and simple. I tell journalists this. You've been in one of my some of my seminars, and this is what I always tell journalists or translators or interpreters, wherever I am. Keep your writing short and simple. So you should have your audience in mind. The purpose of writing should be for people to understand you, not to. Some people write to impress people, and sometimes, but that's their right anyway. I'm not condemning that. I'm just simply saying that I have my own style. I have my own vision, which I stick to very strongly. I've talked to young people, young journalists, and somebody said, "But hey, what if I want people to know that I am a good journalist?"
You master the vocabulary. The big words.
If you start writing, whether it's a book like mine or writing an article, and somebody has to put it aside and go looking for a dictionary, you lose that person. The chances are that person will not come back to that story. You see?
Now, we shall be talking about this book, My Conversion Journey with Christian Cardinal Twumey.
That's correct, yes.
Conversion from what to what?
That's a good question. I think we have to go back perhaps to my childhood. I grew up in Kar, a village in Kumbu, very Catholic area. staunchly Catholic. I grew up in a very Catholic environment. And like every young people, the Catholic Church was where we knew, Catholic school where we went to, and we were very much involved in that, you see. But as I left, and when I left and went out, you know, sometimes it is as if you have been kind of liberated from that. So I kind of backslide. I backslided in my faith, in the Catholic faith. And you mentioned that I went to the bilingual grammar school in Manowobe in those days. It was one of the first government bilingual schools, away from religion somehow, because I didn't have anybody on my back to go to church. I went to the University of Yaoundé back in the 70s. It was then, I think, the lone university we had in this country. And then from there, I did bilingual studies. I had a degree in bilingual studies, French, English, and I did some Spanish. So I had a scholarship to go to Madrid in Spain to study Spanish. From there, I went to Washington, D.C. to do translation and interpretation. So all these things took me away from the kind of religious path which I had been brought up in. And as I went further in my studies, I didn't have any feeling or any attraction for anything religious as such. Until in 1993, when I came back, I was already working in Cameroon. I'd come back to the country in 85, and I was employed by an American company here, and I was working, and the church was not really my thing. You see, my wife and my kids, I have 3 kids, they used to go to church. I didn't. Until 1993, and that is really, we're getting into the book now. 1993, I joined Christian Cardinal Toomey. He had a March for Peace around the city of Douala. That was the 1st of January, 1993. And, you know, I came to cover that March for Peace as a journalist. You know, because I was working with my good friend Francis Wache in Boya and Cameroon Life magazine, one of the good magazines in those days. And Francis asked me to cover the event for the magazine. So I joined the Cardinal more as a journalist to cover that event. But then as the event went around the city, we spent about 5 hours walking around the city of Douala, praying. People were praying around me and asking for peace and so on. And I didn't know any of those prayers, you see. So as we went along, I was then meditating and saying, hey, you know, this is my church. I grew up in this faith. Somehow I don't have anything to say again in this faith, you know. And after that, I had this kind of conversion. That's really the point of conversion. Yes.
Yeah, because when one looks at it, my conversion journey with Christian Cardinal Toomey, and as one reads through the book, one sees very little of Cardinal Toomey, and you start wondering, what role did Cardinal Toomey play in your conversion? Which means that this work for peace during the war kept you thinking, because when one looks through, he sees that your mind went back to old friends, to maybe mentors.
Yes.
One is thinking of your sister, maybe Monica. One is thinking of Father Ngalim's father, and so on. You came back with stories like that that reminded you of those days that you passed with them, maybe without realizing.
It's true. You know, you're not the first person to say, hey, my conversion journey with Christian Cardinal Toomey, and it's just the first part of the book that actually brings him in. And then he's not really the focus of the book.
Yeah.
Yes, that is true. My aim here was to show that once I met Christian Cardinal Toomey, and I wrote the story of my march for peace with him through the city of Douala.
Yeah.
And that story, which is the first story in the book, was published in Cameroon Panorama. It's back in 1994, 95, I don't remember. And, you know, Then Cardinal Tumi read the story. I had never met him before, face to face before that day. And he invited me to come and see him. So I came to his house. He and I talked, and he said, "I read your story. I think it's interesting." And one of the first things he asked me, "Have you ever read the Conversions of St. Augustine?" And I said, "No, I've never read them." He says, your writing sounds very much like the writings of St. Augustine. I will get you a copy." That's what he told me. And he did, about a month thereafter, he went abroad and brought this conversion story of St. Augustine. And it's a wonderful book. And so I read it. To come back to him, he influenced me in many ways. He invited me to join L'Effort Camerounais, and put English in L'Effort Camerounais, which was basically a French paper. L'Effort Camerounais, for those who don't know, is the oldest newspaper in Cameroon, actually. It's a newspaper that has survived. It was created in 1955. Has survived all kinds of, censorships and bannings and so on. So it's still with us today. And he asked me to join L'Effort Camerounais and put in English in it. And that is where I can say that I had this idea of writing simply. How did it happen? He asked me to do. The editor-in-chief at the time was a French woman, a good journalist. He works now for RFI, yes, Madame Poissonnier, and she asked me to write the editorial of the first bilingual issue of L'Effort Camerounais, and I did. I took all the time I could in the world to write that editorial. I thought it was the best thing I'd ever written. It took me about a week. So I took it to Cardinal Tumi and I gave it to him. And, I was watching him and he was reading it. And I thought he was going to tell me, "Oh, that's great. This is good," Excuse me. As he was reading, he was just nodding his head and smiling. After that, he asked me, "Who do you write for? Who are you writing for?" And that took me by surprise. I said, "But it's for L'Effort Camerounais." He said, No, you are not writing for L'Effort Camerounais. You are writing for your university people. You are writing so that and he told me, "Write for the people I preach to." So I asked him, "Who do you preach to?" He said, "I preach to people with something like GCE, A-level, baccalaureate, and below, And so that is where I got the idea to write simply. You see, so in many ways, I mentioned in the preface to this book that when I met him, he taught me, first of all, how to communicate in simple, everyday language, which is the most effective way to communicate. So many of the articles in here, I try to keep them really simple and to the level of every reader. Mm-hmm. Whether I succeed or not is for you as people who are reading, my readers, to tell me. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned that Cardinal Tumi does not appear that often in the book. From the preface, I said that once I met him, my writing, my style of writing changed radically. If you read what I wrote for Cameroon Live magazine and what is in this book, and after I met Cardinal Tumi, it's been a great change in my way of writing. Mm-hmm. When I was writing for Cameroon Live magazine, for Cameroon Post in those days, but we're talking here of the 80s and the early 90s, I was in this mood of writing for people to say, "Hey, what a great piece you have written there. That is good." Even when I wasn't quite sure whether they understood what I had written.
Like the Bate Bissons, maybe?
Yeah. I don't want to call names, but, people have their styles. Yes, Bibi has his style, which is radically different than mine. So I got to Cardinal Tumi, and he made me understand that writing should be to communicate a message. You see, so my purpose here, even though you may not find his name or him in some of the writings there, was to show that I had drastically changed my style of writing, and many of the things I wrote in Cameroon Live magazine, for example, there was a question of sensationalism, where I could even call people's names and make fun of them. Sometimes I read some of the things I wrote in those days, and I kind of shiver a little bit. Yeah, because there's no purpose in calling people's names and ridiculing them. You see, if somebody has done something that is bad, ridicule what the man has done, not the man himself, or not the person themselves. I did that a lot in my early writings. If you go back from the 80s backwards. But when I joined Cardinal Twomey, I had this idea. I learned to be more humane in my writing, where I look at what is going on in society, and I try to point out the weaknesses. And even if somebody's name comes into the picture as being the author of that weak issue which I am discussing, I will try to keep the person more at the background and focus on what is going on. Yes.
Yeah, we'll be tempted to take out some names here and maybe discuss about them. Especially, let's begin with Faranji. What impact did he have in you?
Faranji actually was a person who existed, a Mill Hill father. Back in the, he started the Catholic mission in Kar, which is my village, which is a village between Jakiri and Kumbu, for those who have been up to our area there. And it was one of the oldest Catholic missions in the Northwest Province. It was created around 1948 or something like that. You see, so he was I think he was the first priest there, and he was, from every indication, in every way, quite a brutal person. That one was absolutely, he was a Dutchman from Holland.
And how did he get the name G?
Philip, I have asked people in the village, how did this man get the name G? And nobody seemed to know what he did. Yes. And he probably, as he was learning to speak the Lokan language, he must have said something which people ridicule, and then it became his name. I have asked people, how did this Dutchman get the name Faranji? And I never quite got it, But he was, the embodiment of brutality. That one was, and, he did some really very, like ridiculing people, beating people up in church, kicking the behinds of some elderly people, and it was terrible.
And in spite of all this, he had his admirers.
Oh, there was a gentleman, you read a book, a gentleman who actually met me and said, hey, listen, the church these days is terrible. It's just a marketplace. They want people like Faranji who can beat everybody up and keep them quiet and so the church will not be as noisy as it is today. Yeah, these things happen. People always have their admirers. The man himself, who was admiring him so much, is noted in the village for being absolutely brutal. So you can understand that he had probably found in Faranji, you could have his picture in Faranji, where to him everything was forced.
Now, after the match with Cardinal Twomey, your next move was to spend some time in the monastery in Bangui.
That's correct, yes.
Was that a logical step towards the conversion, or what actually pushed you to go to the monastery at that moment?
That's a good question, because when we had a march around the city of Douala with Christian Cardinal Twomey, I had this feeling that I should rediscover my faith, go back to the faith I had kind of lost, and I didn't know how. I didn't just know what to do. You go through some moments of agony. You agonize over some of these things, and you're wondering, what do I do? What is this kind of feeling normal in me? I should all of a sudden feel like, going back to the church and being a member of the church. And mind you, I didn't even know many of the prayers in church. I didn't go to church. And I was having this feeling, and I just happened to share that feeling with a young lady I was working with. I was working for Pectin Cameroon, an American oil company. And I knew the young lady, Lucia, was very much into the church. And so I told her, I'm having this strange feeling. And And she said, well, you know what? I go to the monastery in Bangui every so often. And, you know, probably she did once a year. And that is a wonderful place for meditation. And I remember the monastery in Bangui. I had been there with my brother. One of my brothers was getting married. And we went there to buy a cake because the monks were known for making good cakes. And I looked at the place and I said, my goodness, how can anyone survive in this type of place? It's on the hills, it's far away from the city, it is quiet, it is cold. And I'm saying, how can somebody spend their life in a place like this? I couldn't understand. So when this young lady told me, you know, if you go to the monastery in Bangui, you will have a good place where you can, you know, chill out, calm down, and you may regain your faith. Well, he didn't say that in this many words, but that was just the
kicker.
She just needed to kickstart that, and that was it. And so I said, but who do I meet in Bangui? And she said, well, you know, I have a priest I talk to when I go there, Father Pius Okoye. He's of late now. May his soul rest in peace. And she gave me the man's there were no phones in those days. You know, talking here of the 80s and the early 90s, I think. And when I say phones, like cell phones. So I wrote the man a letter saying, you know, I want to come and spend some time with you. Are you okay with that? And he wrote back a very beautiful letter. I said, oh, of course, we're here for that. Come. So I went there, and that one too forms part of the second story I have there. The 1 week I spent at the monastery in Bangui. It's a wonderful time for me, because it was then that I met this wonderful monk, a priest, Father Pius, who kind of calmed me down and told me, listen, all these feelings you're having are not strange. They are quite normal. So don't think that something is wrong with you. All you need to do is calm down and pray. Mm-hmm. You know, you're talking to someone who didn't even know a single prayer. Mm-hmm. So I said, well, how do I pray? He said, well, you know, you don't really need to be reciting all these other prayers that have been made. Come up with your own prayer and keep in direct contact with God, and He will help you. Mm. And for the 1 week I was there, you know, He kind of coached me, mentored me, you know, and gave me things to read and to think about. And as a Catholic, you know, I had not been to sacrament of confession or reconciliation for a very long time. And then He heard my confession, and I went back to the church, receiving Holy Communion and all the sacraments. And I came back from there, newly minted Christian, if you would. But it was great. It was a wonderful period, you know, at the monastery. I didn't think anyone could just go to a place like that and sit down and do nothing but just sit and pray and meditate. But it did. When you look at the 1 week I spent in the monastery, it enabled me to look at my life, give me a kind of retrospective view of my life, you know, and to see what is important and what is not important. Because there are very many things we think are really important. For me, especially, well, I've reached an age now where I say, if I do not do something which disturbs you as a person, you know, I believe that what I'm doing is the correct thing to do. Meaning that I no longer worry about what people may think about me. At first, as a young person, and I see that in my children, you know, where they get very worried because somebody didn't greet them in the morning. They start thinking, hey, what have I done wrong? And, you know, go into all kinds of mental gymnastics. But you get to my age now, and you have to say, hey, you know, let me not harm the other person. But whatever I do, you know, I don't care so much about what people may think about me. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So was that the first and last visit, or since then you've paid some visits?
Yes, in fact, I went back to the monastery, was it this year? No, late last year. And it was a totally different thing. And that type of inspiration was no longer there. The place was changed a little, changed somewhat, and I didn't go there with the same mindset, So, but it was still quite good. It was still a time to be away from Douala with all the hustles and bustles of the city, just to sit in the hills of Bangui. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's one of the most beautiful places you can go to. On the hill, you see miles and miles and miles. It's very calm, very quiet, very cool place. It's really nice. So I went there for a week, but it was a totally different thing. I didn't go there this time to ask for mentorship or, I just went to sit down and do some reading and do some writing on my own, yes.
Yeah, in the book you also mentioned the Foyer de Charité that is in Bonjongo.
That's correct.
And when I read through it, I began to ask myself, were you trying to sort of inspire people to follow the founder of this foyer? I am talking of the lady who stayed for 30 years living on the Blessed Sacrament. The Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah.
And I began to wonder, for 30 years you don't eat, you don't drink water, you live on the Blessed Sacrament. Instead of people looking at you with pity, they instead come to you for solutions to their problems.
Yes. In fact, I didn't even know about her. She's the foundress of the Foyer de Charité, and so I went there and I met the priest who was there, Father Jude Mbi. He's the one who told me the story about this woman. For me, I was looking for a calm place where I could, stay. Usually when I want to do some writing, I like to isolate myself. I go to Bonjongo, or even to Paul VI Memorial in Mendankwe, Bamenda, also a very good place, or to the monastery, So I went to Bonjongo. That's when I was told the story of this lady. It was
quite inspiring.
Quite inspiring, yes. I just couldn't understand that. But there are some of these people who are eventually saints who do things which are well beyond the understanding of people like you and me, So she's one of those. Yes, but and Bonjongo Foyer de Charité also provides me. I still go there with an environment where I can really sit down, be by myself, away from all the worries of everyday life, and do some writing. Yes. So that's where I learned the story of this of the lady who founded the Foyer de Charité. Yes, and there are Foyer de Charités all over the world, actually. Yes, so from France, it spread all over the world. That's correct. Yes.
Another place which I was trying to fit myself in when I read through the book was the university campus in Buea, where you're trying to describe the beautiful scenery there. You try to contrast it with the mountain that sometimes vomits out its belly. And I began to ask myself, were you going there just for some quiet also, knowing that the university campus is a noisy place?
Yes.
But there in Buea you found quiet, and you try to contrast it now with this, with the volcanic nature of the mountain.
Yes, actually, Philip, I went to the University of Buea to meet a friend of mine, also a translator and an interpreter. And we had an appointment at the university. It was a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where you just find yourself in a place and you get some inspiration. I didn't plan to write anything like this. It's titled A Prayer at the University of Buea. And so I went to... My past visits to UB, University of Buea, had always been when there are students around. And it's a big place. There are very many people walking around. So one Saturday morning, I happened to be there. I went there, arrived at about 8 o'clock, and my friend wasn't there yet. And the place was eerily quiet. I just couldn't believe it. I said, hey, is this the place I come to? And it's a beehive of activities. What's happening today? Well, it was a Saturday morning. So that kind of inspired me, to write that prayer. It was also during the Lenten season. And, Lenten season for us Catholics is a period of calm and a prayerful period of penance. And, all those things combined with the quiet environment gave me the inspiration to write that story. Mm. And actually the nature, the volcanic nature, I actually had it. I was contrasting the quiet nature of the university at that time with some of the things that do happen at the University of Boya. Recently we had students being brutalized there, and there was a lot of chaos there. I was saying, hey, UB, you are this quiet, but what happens that every so often there is this violence that erupts from beneath this beautiful environment. Either it's the students themselves or the forces of law and order. And we recently saw that very unfortunate scene that happened there with students being beaten and rolled on the ground and in mud and so on. And there are all rumors of what happened to some of them being raped, and which was very unfortunate. And I was saying, hey, this quiet environment here. I'm all alone here. I mean, it felt a little odd to be all alone there. Occasionally I will hear somebody talk at a distance and then they disappear. And the place was absolutely quiet. And then I was contrasting it with the stories that come from the University of Boya. Riots and, violence of one sort or another. And it was just a sharp contrast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what actually gave me the inspiration. Mm-hmm. I just happened to be there for something else. Mm-hmm. And then,
the quietness inspired you to come
gave me this inspiration. I always say that Mother Muse, is always very generous sometimes and very unexpected places, and times.
Maybe we should come back a little bit to John Fonzeyu, who was your friend and brother from childhood. Mm-hmm. And you write here so sentimentally about him, remembering your past days and how you came back, and even was wondering when you went to pray for Father Ngalim's father, your sister, and each time you remember some of those your people with whom you grew up, who are now gone to the world beyond, it is usually most often with a tear coming down your eyes.
Yes, I guess. In any case, I'm usually kind of sentimental. That one is, you can see it running through the book. Mm-hmm. And there are actually two Johns I mentioned in the book.
John B.
And John Fondeyu, yes. Mm-hmm. With John Fondeyu was actually, he and I grew up together. We served the first Mass together when in church. We were still small, young boys then.
Under Faranji,
yeah. The dreaded Faranji. Yes. And he and I, so it was, it's one of the first friends you have as you're growing up. You go to school together, primary school, you run around together, and you learn to serve Mass together. And then, in fact, John and I, he went to St. Augustine's College and I went to bilingual grammar school. But during the holidays, we were always together in the village. So we had lots of things to share together. And he went to University in Nigeria, I think Zaria, I think it was, indeed geology. He came back. And his wife, Alucia, is somebody who were together in the University of Yaoundé. So it's a family I know very well. And John's children, I know them. And then all of a sudden, John died very unexpectedly. And it was a very difficult thing for you just to grasp. Some of those things that happen and you start wondering, hey, what is going on? Is this life worth living? And so John came into the picture because he's buried in the same burial ground where all my family is buried, actually. My mom, my dad, my sister-in-law, and my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, they're all there. And so it was a place where you go and it's tendency to meditate. And reading, I've read poems of people who go to meditate in the burial ground, where their loved ones are buried. And at first I used to wonder, why would somebody go to a place like that, and what would inspire you in a place like that? Until it happened to me, The inspiration may not come right there, Philip, when I'm standing there, but, it's after I leave and I go back home and then I start reflecting on what had happened, then those words come to describe that. John was a dear friend of mine, and was sad when it's sad that he's gone, So, and John Beamy was a translator and interpreter. We grew up together, actually. He went to SASI, and then I kind of followed him because he went to the University of Yaoundé, did a bilingual degree, and went for his studies in Georgetown University. Some years later, I was to go to the same university. That's where they were training those of us who were in a bilingual program and studying to be translators and interpreters. And so John and I came from the same village. And John too passed away, unfortunately, some years ago. So when I think, and John came into the picture when I was paying a tribute to Professor Lantum there.
Yeah.
Yes, Daniel Lantum in one of the stories in the book. And I could recall the role John played, when I wanted to go abroad. And it's one of the most difficult things sometimes is making a decision. Even when it is something you've been yearning for, and all of a sudden it comes, sometimes it gets to be very difficult to make a decision. And that happened to me at that moment. We just completed from the University of Yaoundé, and then the presidency said, we're giving you a scholarship to go to Spain, and it was not an easy decision. Because there were many other options. I could go for Professor Van Loon said, hey, I want you in my Department of African and of American and African Studies at the University of Yaoundé, and you would teach there, and then you go to America and do a PhD in African Studies. And Dr. Lantum said, no, go to Spain. These people are making you an offer. It may not come again, Just go. And it was a very difficult decision to take. But then that's when John B. stepped in, I went to the presidency and he said, listen, why are you hesitating? Just go, And that's what sent me packing for...
Now that you've mentioned that aspect of it, let's come back to your encounter with Professor Lantum. It was through Professor Lantum that you had your first salary.
Exactly, Philip.
As you left university.
I left university. We were talking here back in the 70s, 76, I think it was. 75, 76 is when I completed my degree of bilingual studies, and I just happened to run into Dr. Lantum. Well, somebody I knew, but I met him one day, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm waiting for my results. We just wrote our degree examination, and I'm waiting for the results." And he said, "Hey, come see me in my office." So I went there, and he gave me a pile of things to translate. Of course, I was studying translation at the university. But it was more the theory, right? Theory of translations and so on. Hardly did I ever sit down to translate anything. And then he gave me this, and it was quite a challenge for me. And I was working with him. I was not even thinking of payment. Well, if he had given me 3,000, 5,000 francs, I would have been happy. But then to call me in at the end of the month and give me 50,000 francs back in the 70s,
you trembled.
I never seen that much money before. And then he said, "That's your salary." I said, "Are you sure?" I thought maybe, did he want me to go and give the money to my brother? Because my Kenyo brother, my brother Kenyo, you talked about, was a good friend of his. So I was thinking maybe he wants me to go and give the money to him. And he said, "No, that's your money. You earn it. You've been working for me this well, and you earn this money." And it was wonderful. It's something which you never forget throughout your life. All of a sudden you're given this money. in compensation for what you have done. It's money you have earned, and you have earned it honorably. You see, that's what he told me. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm paying you for what you have done, and you've done well. You see, so those are things you never forget, and that's why in my tribute to him, I do raise that issue, and I mention that, and I was happy for that.
Yeah, in that tribute to him, you mentioned quite some exciting things that one would have. For instance, your first encounter with his first secretary, which you kept staring at her, and she asked whether you wanted to get a picture of her. One expected to see it after that, because I imagine that you worked with her for some time.
Yes,
but it ended there.
Yes, yes. She was quite a secretary. I mean, she was, one thing, I came and knocked on the door, I can remember that, and she didn't even look up, and she just grumbled, So I came in, and she wouldn't even look at me, I started looking at her, and a very nice-looking lady. I mean, I was a university student in those days, and, we were always sizing up women and seeing, so I was sizing her up, and I wasn't even aware that she was, that she realized I was looking at her, and then she just suddenly looked up at me and said, "Do you want to take my picture to me? Prendre la photo," or something like that, and the aggressive way with which he said it, kept my distance, and that was just the encounter. From there on, our relationship was just more of very professional. I did what I had to do. Dr. Lantum gave me an office just next to his, so actually I didn't meet the lady that often, you see. So I think she just kind of dropped out of the picture. But when I came back in 1985 and went back to Dr. Lantum, and he still gave me some work to do. Then I was already, a full-fledged translator and interpreter. I did some work with him because he was working with the WHO, World Health Organization, in some research work, in sometimes in the Northwest, sometimes in the Center region, and he needed, some of the things to be translated. So when I came back, I was waiting to be employed, and he still gave me a chance to work with him, which I really appreciated. And at that time, I also talk about his secretary who was there at the time. But that one was quite a contrast to the one I met some years earlier. One was a very motherly person, very, and she always asked me, "How are you feeling? How are you? Would you want me to bring you something to drink?" Or, I said, "No, ma." But she was a very motherly person, the second secretary. Unlike the first one. The first one was much younger person, much more aggressive, and I kept my distance.
And there is this Ngambe man who came to you.
The Ngambe man, yes. Dr. Lantum was working with traditional medicine men, was very much traditional healers. Let me use that word, healers, because they were men and women. And he did quite some research in traditional medicine. And for the time I was with him, I came to know many of those traditional healers, and I read quite a lot because, some of them wrote their stories, and the idea was that the government was trying to see how they could, integrate some of them into the health system, and Dr. Lantum played quite a role in that. And so many of them came around. And one thing that will strike you if you read their history is the number of ailments they all claim to treat. I mean, they can give you a long list, 20 different diseases, then they tell you, "Hey, we will treat this," And this particular Ngambe man who struck me, there were actually about two of them, actually. One was from my village, who told me, he was very good at dealing with diseases that link to the sexual organs and things like that. And he claimed he treated one man who was I think whether a minister or a member of somebody's office in Yaoundé, and that the man had virtually put him on his payroll. He was earning a lot of money. You know, he always claimed those things. You know, but this particular man who came in with a young girl to see Dr. Lantum had looked at me for a while and then said, "Well, I'm going to give you something." And so I said, "Well, what is it?" And he gave me a small little bottle with some white powdery substance in. And he said, "Look, if you just look at it, you just get this, you look at the woman you like, you just spray it in her direction, and the woman will follow you." I said, "Why? What the hell is this?" And he came in with a young girl. He was carrying his bag. And so when I took it, I looked at it, and I turned and looked at the girl. And the man read my mind and quickly stood up. I said, no, and bundled the girl out of the office. It was quite some fun. But they all claim to treat all kinds of ailments, and they probably do. I mean, and later on, Philip, I was in Canada studying comparative literature, and what I had picked up from my days with Dr. Lantum, dealing with traditional medicine, and I did a study on, it was more to do with traditional religion. And when you're dealing with traditional religion, of course, traditional healers play a very active part in it. And I looked at the literatures of the world and the role traditional medicine play in it. And it is fascinating. It's a fascinating study. Yes, because it's not only in Africa. You look at North America, American Indians, and I think they call them the shamans or something like that. They're very much into traditional religion and traditional medicine. You go to Latin America, for example. If you look at the literatures from Latin America, you will not be surprised to see that the role of people who are dealing with herbs and all kinds of things right there. And then in Africa, of course, they play an important role. And I was inspired from my days working with Dr. Lantum and with traditional healers here. So, what I had in mind still inspired me when I was working in the world of literature. Yes. So.
Apparently, our time is really running out very fast, and I would not want us to end without talking about you worked as a journalist during the first visit to Cameroon of Pope John Paul II.
Oh yes.
Yes. What went through your mind when you were put, say, on this assignment to be close to the Pontiff?
Yes.
The first Catholic.
Yeah.
The successor of Peter.
That's correct. Yes. In fact, it was since I was working for L'Effort Camerounais. L'Effort Camerounais being the property of the bishops of Cameroon, they gave us a very prominent place there by just about wherever the Supreme Pontiff was. We were there. And as you say, how did I feel? It's a kind of feeling. Sometimes it happens, and it's only later on that you say, hey, I was there. Because when you're on the beat, you're kind of running up and down, especially when you came to the airport, and you're standing there with other journalists and, watching. And so, hey, is this the man you've been reading so much about? And he walks by you, and we also met him at close quarters when we went up to that hotel, Mount Febe, I think, and the Supreme Pontiff and the Pope came in, and it's only much later than you start thinking, hey, so I was there, and this is how I feel. But when you're running around as a journalist, as you very well know, right at that very moment, sometimes some of those things don't really come to mind. You're interested in the story. You're looking at what's happening around. What am I going to tell people who are not here, who will be reading me? So, but it was a great moment, yes. And especially When we went to the airport, the military airport. I think it's the military airport now in Yaoundé, where the Pope said
the military base.
Yes, the military base.
The air base.
Where he said the final mass in Yaoundé. And it was a fascinating thing, with so many people around and the music going on, and I'm looking, and the President of the Republic arrives. I mean, there's a lot of agitation, and everybody's agitating, and everything calms down. The Pope arrives, and it's a totally different story, because instead of this agitation, people running up and down, they seem to be calm. People are just watching. Everybody, even the security guys who were around, because one of them was standing right in front of me, and he and I actually had a small conversation, although I noticed that he didn't want to speak out very clearly. Yeah, he too, he just, and when the president arrived, he was very agitated, looking around, going around and making sure that everything was all right. Well, when the Pope came, he too, everybody just stood and was watching, and I could see him just watching as intently as I was, because I was looking around to see, hey, how are people receiving this? So I mentioned that contrast in my book, where the arrival of the head of state, everything there's a lot of,
agitation
around,
left and right.
Left and right. The army is running left and right, the police, everybody. But when the Pope arrives,
it's solemnity.
Everything is quiet. Everything is calm. Of course, not quiet, because of course the drumming and the dancing and but it was a different type of agitation, you may say. Yes. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, time has cut us short. I would have really loved us to talk much more about the book, especially your advice on making the on the Catholic Church and reunification,
right.
giving the church, that is giving to the church as a Christian duty, what is expected of Reverend Fathers, taking care of their health and things like that. It's quite a rich book, and maybe we shall still have time to come back in detail to some of those aspects, because they are actually important.
Right.
And one last word. This book is meant for who? Just in a few seconds.
It's meant for everyone, I guess. Anybody who wants to read it, or anyone who is interested in conversion stories. I think we all each have a conversion story to tell. At one time or another, you will see that there was a moment in your life when you needed somebody, and the person came there and gave you something different, especially in the religious aspect. So Cardinal Tume happened to be there in 1993, and I happened to be around, and then our stories kind of merged, and from there on till today, we were still together. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Jumbam, for coming. Televiewers, I hope you did gather one or two things that could also help you in your journey towards conversion. Not just conversion, in your journey towards an aspect of life that you've been looking for an inspiration to get into it. And so, until next time when we shall be together again, we want to say thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mr. Jumbam, for your time.
It's always a pleasure, It's not the first time you have me on your program in DBS, so, I'm always there whenever you need me.
All right.
Give me a call.
So, televiewers, thank you, and see you some other time. Bye.